You are listening to the Casting Shadows podcast, an extension of the Casting Shadows blog and the RuneSlinger YouTube channel. This episode will be looking at quality of play and what, if anything, we can do about it. Can I make my game better? Written on June 11th, 2020. Not everyone asks this question, of course, but it, or some variation of it, is common enough. Sometimes it's just a feeling, a worry after a session, or a weight that builds as sessions dwindle in the rearview mirror. It's a curious question, isn't it? It invites a series of other questions. What is meant by better? Is it a struggle with a specific game or games in general? Who's asking? How much time has been spent on play? What efforts have been made to address whatever problems are perceived with that play? If this question doesn't invite questions like those and more, and on an ongoing basis, then is there really a game group, or is it just a few individuals tempting fate both in fiction with their characters and in fact with their use of leisure time? Is anyone driving the bus to Funtown, or are the passengers expecting the bus to find its own way there? Do we even agree on where Funtown is? Can we improve our games? Can we make them better? What does better mean? Does it mean system mastery? Does it mean creativity? Does it mean description? Does it mean character development, character action, recognizable story forms and beats? Does it mean earned success or believable success? Does it mean dice, Doritos, danger, drama? Does it mean long-form play, short? Does it mean sticking with one system or sampling many? Does it mean the same thing to everyone in the group? And does it mean it all the time? Can we improve our games? Yes and no. I'll bite. Can we improve our games? It's possible. It is just as possible that in this instance, and perhaps more besides, it isn't. Usually posts like this are all positive and full of encouragement, but this post isn't a post like that. It's its very own thing. Why? Well, it's a matter of how much attention we've been paying to the people involved, and how they interact with each other, the system, and the setting. Just as much, it matters how much of what happens in play is the result of conscious decision rather than habit or convenience. Momentum, habit, and a willingness to look away from growing signs of trouble in favor of enjoying a present moment of goodness, however illusory it might be, are powerful forces. How much of the game is really in our hands, and how much are we simply leaving to luck and wishful thinking? If we aren't willing to take more control of how we play, then the answer is going to be in the negative in regard to any question of whether we can make our games better. If we are willing, then we come right up against the reality that there might be a little bit of work involved in our play. Like anything worth doing, practice points the way toward the attainment of perfection. Interestingly, the closer we get to what we once perceived as perfection, the more our notion of perfection changes. In my experience, though, by the time this has happened, the pursuit of that elusive perfection has become a pleasure of its own and cannot rightly be called a problem at all. That this happens for me is not proof that it can happen for you, but it also isn't proof that it won't. Try it. You might like it. There will be parts, however, that we might not like or that we might not be willing to accept or implement. We might have to change games because we've been playing one that doesn't match one or more major requirements of our group. We might have to change the distribution of roles and responsibilities in the group, perhaps radically, perhaps just to a new person. We might have to add or subtract one or more people. Finding new people can feel like a lot of effort at times. For some of us, it's effort all of the time. But removing people from the equation of the group is worse, in my experience. Imagine if you played with people who had the sense and sensitivity to remove themselves from a game that they were dragging down. Imagine if you played with people with the sense and sensitivity to choose games and pitches that fit the group as a whole from the start. In my experience, a lack of ability to predict the future is far harder to improve in humanity than common decency. But I could be wrong on that score. So, if we were trying to turn a no into a yes, what would we need to work on? Attention is paid, not earned. There's a lot of talk now about what has become known as Session Zero. I fully support and encourage this process, but it cannot end there. Paying a lot of attention at the start cannot be simply lobbying for and winning a debate over what game to play and leaving the rest to chance. It cannot be about choosing who to play with and then just winging the rest. It cannot be about just being nice. Attention begins with the holy trinity of being willing to talk with the players, choose the right game for those players, and be a part of solutions for that game and those players. This is where it starts. It does not end here, nor does the Trinity end once play begins. We are gamers, and the Trinity is our flag, our uniform, and our oath of office. Reflection is not a mirror. We are not prescient, nor do the flowers of our collaborative creativity bloom in identically perfect blossoms. We need to monitor how things come to differ from what we may have all agreed to, and we should be ready to understand and discuss how those changes affect our shared enjoyment of play. Session Zero cannot simply be a memory of what we did when we picked the game. To be true to the decisions we made when we started and be true to the decisions we want or need to make now, and to even see what is really going on, we need to take the time to consider and reflect on the game, both alone as individuals and together as the group. This isn't something that has to be heavy in a cause for telling people to play right. For me, almost all the time, it's a celebration of the game and its players. Session Zero, then, never really ends. It must be allowed to cast a long shadow down through the weeks, months, and years of play. A shadow, please note, does not change or force its environment to conform to it. Rather, it conforms to the shape it encounters, adding a perspective of time and distance that reaches back to the point of origin and colors what it crosses. It adds information, and if we look hard, we should be able to discern its shape and how that shape has changed with distance and a shifting of the light. Casting metaphors and shadows aside for a moment of clarity, there is much to be gained from reflecting on our group, our play, and our behavior to assess how things are going. It might be a moment, or it might be a chat outside of game time, or it might be a course correction meeting instead of game time. Session Zero comes before play. Other such sessions take place as a regular part of the ongoing experience of play. And if they don't, then what happens in the group and where we end up is just luck. We cannot prevent the bad times, and we cannot repeat the good times. We aren't running the game. The game is running on its own. Session Zero can take a lot of forms along a Familiar listeners, wait for it. Spectrum of options. Ranging from accepting a specific and detailed pitch from one player to brainstorming and deciding to execute an idea as a group of players. Regardless of approach, things still change. They change in play and because of play and because of work and diapers and cancer and mood and misunderstanding and because of all the myriad messes that make us more than meat. Regardless of approach, even if we assume that we are there to realize the clear and planned path of one particular person, or in the other extreme, if we assume that we are all to be equally making things up as we go, things can turn out to be not what we as a group wanted. What then is to be done about that? Do we cancel it because it isn't what we wanted, or do we identify and then fix what needs to be fixed? Are these sessions 0 and course correction sessions all that can be done? Decisions. Once we get to this point of seeing things that need to change and acting on them, we find ourselves putting some work into our game. Social and analytical work, but work nonetheless. This can be too much for some. Some would prefer to just play. For those who put very little into their games, this minimalist strategy can work wonders. It can be a fantastic recipe for fun, providing no one screws it up with differing expectations. With little invested, it is a simple matter to pivot quickly to something else or to jettison the game altogether. Play can be as simple as just add water and voila, a tasty snack is ready for the whole gang. In contrast, a game that asks for or is given more effort can be a delicious stew, providing all the ingredients are present and no one adds too much or too little of anything. This recipe is more complicated. More can go wrong, and it isn't always obvious what it was that went wrong. Worse, it isn't always possible to fix it. Sometimes you can keep it on the stove a little longer or remedy a lack of flavor with a pinch of seasoning. Sometimes you do actually have to throw the thing out, change the ingredients, pay more attention to the preparation and process, and start again. If you don't, you're left with a meal you don't really want to eat, either because it is bland and uninteresting, or because it actually leaves a bad taste in your mouth. How do you know which you have to do? A quick glance back at the headers may reveal my thoughts on the matter. We might not actually know what to do, but building a process that includes reflection on play and paying attention to the people we play with can provide a lot of useful information when having to make such a decision. In my experience, for what it's worth, an enjoyable game is also enjoyable to talk about. What are people thinking has happened and will happen next? What do they intuit about the characters in play? How did they feel when the dice hit the table? What are they planning to do with their characters in play and in terms of development? What are favorite moments about someone else's character? What are moments of brilliance from the GM, if there is a GM? How is the group moved to action or emotion by the setting and circumstances of play? Is the feedback some variation on the expected good game? Or are there specifics, good and bad? Who is thinking about adding or taking on a different role in the group? Who is struggling with something and could use some flexibility and understanding? Conclusion? In the end, like with most things, we get out what we put in. If we are in the habit of just showing up and just playing, then we should not be surprised if the group breaks up, that the game falters or collapses, that goals are not understood and are not met, and that fun is fickle. After all, nothing was being done to ensure those things would go well. If things have been going well, we should feel thankful for being so lucky. Autopilot is great until it encounters a situation beyond its capabilities. Worse, a habit is often something we just do without even thinking about it, not necessarily something we enjoy. With an eye on things, with a bit of consideration, with a bit of involvement in how things are going, it is possible to have a better game for all participants. Or we could just rely on luck. All right. Usually when we review these older posts from the blog, as we go through the text, I usually feel compelled to insert some observations or reactions from the current year compared to the year in which it was written. Now, this one was written in 2020, as we said, so that was only 5 years ago. That was actually 5 years ago. 5.5 years ago. Okay, so not a lot has changed. This one came from a development of a procedure of play, a way of conceiving of play over decades, right? It's unlikely to change in as short a period of time as just 5 years. And it might only change if I were to encounter a radically different group of people that I had never encountered before. By this point, I stand pretty strongly by this perspective and this advice, such as it is. There are some things that I wouldn't phrase this way now, these days. 5 years ago, I was still trying very hard to connect to other gamers out there using the most common vocabulary in use out there on the internet. Not necessarily the way that the silent majority of gamers who don't participate and talk about their games online might use. Not necessarily the words that are copied and pasted from one generation of game to the next generation of game, and not necessarily with the understanding that everybody who uses those terms might have. But it was a way to really get to the meat of what those words might mean to the majority of people who are using them in this public format of social media. I don't do that anymore. It's now time for a different experiment. But we'll talk about that in another episode. So looking back over Can I Make My Game Better from June 11th, 2020, there are some instances of language use that is not mine that I don't agree with, such as the use of the word fiction for role-playing games. We've talked about this before. As I've said before, this is a word that hides more than it reveals, and it forces us into a perspective and thinking about what we are doing when we play, which adds in layers that I don't believe that a lot of people actually intend, such as the sense that we are telling a story and that we have a process going on in play where fiction is being constructed, and at a certain point it becomes set in stone unless there are mechanisms in place which allow us to alter the fiction, and that we are all a distance removed from a purely intellectual process where, as we've talked about here, and as most of the people that I've played with in my life experience, a significant portion of play is about the experience, the emotional connection to the moment, the fun of imagining instantaneously the action which is taking place, and in the mind's eye strikes us as believable, acceptable, understandable, comprehensible, and has nothing whatsoever to do with a story. So I would not use the word fiction today. Also, in the article, there's a link to a video, which I don't remember if I've moved over to YouTube, but it's on my Vimeo channel. There was a period of time where we did a a Vimeo extension of the YouTube RPG Brigade. There's a reference there to a video I made called Theory and Practice. I had been asked by several people, some of whom were quite passionate about it, about why we couldn't just play, why I felt the idea of thinking about play or being conversant with theories of play might be helpful. And that video, not to spoil it, but that video highlights how our picking up of a game, reading it, and learning how that system works, even on a casual level, that is the theory side of play. That's not just playing. Sitting down, laughing, talking to each other, that's the active play. Knowing what we're doing in those moments, that all relies on theory. And so the more we are pushing theory into the background, the less likely we are to have any sort of control or understanding of what's going on in our play. And so the greater the risk is that we'll have unsatisfying results. However dramatic that might be is a factor of the personalities involved, not the theories involved. But I think you see what I mean. I'll put a link to that video in the show notes and to the other links which crop up in this article. Toward the end of the post, I make a reference to the headers, but in an audio format, it's going to be a little difficult unless I decide after this point of recording that I'm going to adjust the audio to make them stand out. And maybe I will do that, but let's talk about them now. The title of the piece was, of course, Can I Make My Game Better? The first header was, Can we improve our games? Can we make them better? The next header was, Yes and No. The next was, Attention is paid, not earned. I'll come back to that because I think it's readily misunderstood. The next is, Reflection is not a mirror. And the last was, Decisions. To jump back to attention is paid, not earned, it's that there are a lot of expectations from a role where there's a central clearinghouse of information, such as a game master with all the answers. There's an expectation that that is making the game something such as worthy of paying attention to. But in this context of actively paying attention to our fellow players, to the game that we're playing, to the way we've decided to play it, and all of those other considerations, far more important is the willingness to pay that attention. Unless that step happens first, it really doesn't matter how valuable other elements are, how worthy other elements are of attention, because they're not going to get it in the first place. The person to pay it isn't paying it. That's what this is about. Reflection is not a mirror is also confusing. This one is even more esoteric. But in brief, the idea is that we are not the things we have accomplished. Our play exists purely in the moment. And what makes us a good player or a good game master or someone who understands the situation very well or someone who is a vital part of keeping the group healthy and satisfied, this is something that exists purely in the moment. Reflection is not a mirror. The content of our play isn't who we are. It's what we are doing in the moment. And if we want to go deeper, then we can get into the discussions that we've had around conversation is the medium of play. But again, that's something for another day. So, can we make our games better? You tell me. This has been another episode of the Casting Shadows podcast, an extension of the Casting Shadows blog at castingshadowsblog.com and the Runeslinger YouTube channel, which you can find with @Runeslinger on YouTube. Other links will be provided in the show notes. You can find other episodes of the Casting Shadows podcast at castingshadowspodcast.com. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if you feel motivated to become a part of the discussion, please consider leaving a voice message at SpeakPipe. speakpipe.com/castingshadowspodcast. All one word. Anyway, until the next time, take care.